But I just check with Brother Jake. Salam alaikum, Maghid. Is your moderation working now? Is it working now?
Nah, bro. I don't know if it's just I'm an idiot because I don't really use TikTok, but it's not working and it's totally different than last week. So I don't know. I guess we could just get on with the show. Whatever.
Okay. Yeah,
I don't know what's going on, bro.
I'm not sure, but you're modded up on my end, and it shows it when you and people are saying it's lagging, so I'm not sure what's going on.
It's lagging on my end, or just in general, the whole thing.
No, one person said it was lagging from the comments. Can we just get a confirmation? So people are saying it's good. Okay. All right, let's proceed. We don't want to waste any more time.
Before we proceed, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Jake. This is Yusuf again. This is I don't know if you remember, but we were talking a few weeks ago, and I mentioned Metaphysics Mike, the YouTuber. He's a oneness Christian. He's up on the panel right over here. Metaphysics Mike. He's great. He's intelligent, and yeah. Oh, Unitarian. I'm sorry. Yeah, he's a Unitarian. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was listening to him talk earlier. So yeah.
Nice to meet you, Jake. Happy to be here sporting the back end.
Likewise.
Well, can I get an introduction as well?
Yeah, I'll give G1
you want
introduction. G1, no problem.
I guess so. Yeah, go ahead.
G1's a nice, friendly guy, and there's, even if we have a theological difference, like he's still a polite gentleman and very cordial to talk to. So everybody, please welcome G1. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, go ahead. So I think you were talking. You were the one talking last time.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Yeah. So I think even though Blockboy didn't articulate himself properly, the point which he was trying to give is that we can give like a metaphysical explanation on why we would count one God instead of three, such that if essence and being is going to be identified, then if the three persons are the same, if the three persons are identical to the essence, then they have the same being, right? Then we can count one being in that respect, right? But then we would still affirm like a relative distinction between the persons, which constitute the individuality of the persons. So in one respect, we're counting three because of the personhood, which is understood, and counting one in respect to the essence, which is understood.
And is there a relative distinction between the person and essence, or they're absolutely identical?
Are they so when you're saying that they're absolutely identical, like what do you mean here? Since within the scholastic notion of it, it would just mean that they're one and the same reality, but there's different notions of it in different literatures. So what do you mean here?
I mean the classical account, which is an equivalence relation, which everything has to itself and satisfies Leibniz law.
No, the identity relation here is not going to be absolute. No.
Okay, so then under my usage and what is I think most common today, they're not going to be absolutely identical because they're not going to be satisfying Leibniz's law. Is that right? In terms of them being identical in that way.
Yeah, sure. If the statement or the identity statement here is going to be absolute, then sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what makes it such that they count as one God?
Under your notion or under my notion of identity?
No, under what you were just saying earlier.
Oh, that was just like a metaphysical explanation. So that wouldn't be like an explanation, logically speaking, when it comes to the view of identity. Because when you read, like, for example, Richard Clark and his notion of principle of identity, he has like, he relates it to the essence and being. So something is going to be identical to its own essence or being, right? And then when we're speaking about like the persons being identical to the essence, right, which is identical to the being of God, then they're going to be one and the same being within reality. So we're going to count one God.
Okay, but what are the conditions for that?
The conditions for it being one God?
Correct.
The conditions for it being one God is that like essence and existence has to be one and the same thing in reality, such that it doesn't admit any other entities. Because if it does, then it implies that like these entities are like distinct by some type of perfection. So pure actuality is going to be like a condition for it, in fact, if you know what that is, to be more precise.
It is, but I'm really trying to hone in on this concept. So you're saying that they're going to count as one God because their essence and existence are identical, correct?
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Okay, and is that going to work for other sortals?
I haven't introduced souls. I'm just talking about a metaphysical explanation on identity.
Yeah. So that's what I'm trying to say is this big metaphysical picture, or what you're framing as a metaphysical picture. I don't believe that it actually is, but what you're framing as a metaphysical picture, is it going to map onto other discussions when it comes to humans and the distinctions between us and all of the different categories, or it's only unique to a discussion about God?
Like, what do you mean when it comes to like the way in which identity is understood metaphysically?
No. I'm talking about how we count and the nature by which we count.
Yeah, but we count by identity. Or if you're talking about counting by identity in a metaphysical sense, right, then it's going to be in relation to like the essence or being of that individual. But then if you're speaking about in a logical sense, right, the notion of identity which I'm going to employ is going to be relative. So we do count by identity.
I'm not.
Walaikum salam.
I don't think you're understanding. Like,
What's not there to be understood?
I don't think I don't know, but I don't think you're understanding my question. I'm asking, what are the conditions in order for us to count that there's only one God? You said, insofar as I understood what you said, it's because the nature or essence, unless you're using it differently like the other guy was, are identical to its existence. Is that correct?
Yeah, because it would not admit any other entity such for the entity is God. Because if it does, then it would mean that the entity, right, is the entity which we're identifying to be the only God. So it would just mean that it's going to be the same thing.
That seems pretty specific to your understanding, well, your specific understanding, because I'm wondering, do you have a consistent counting method by which you are counting identities such that you can apply this principle that you just explained?
Well, if you're talking about, so if you're talking about a consistent method such that it doesn't violate any principles, then the metaphysical system would be relative to what the person's important of how identity is going to be understood metaphysically. So it's just going to be relative. But if you're asking for like a universal...
We're not talking about that. We're talking about how you are counting entities, how you're counting gods, how you're counting persons, how you're counting humans, how you're counting animals. That's what I'm asking. Is there a consistent formula by which, or conditions by which, you are counting these entities that you can actually make it universally applicable?
Yeah, I feel like we're kind of talking past each other. So when you're saying it's consistent, are you saying that it doesn't violate principles?
I can explain to you how I count things.
Yeah, but I'm asking clarification about what you're saying.
And it will be universally applicable, and it won't be ad hoc in the way that you seem to be presenting it.
Look,
I'm asking you if your counting method maps onto created things.
I'm saying it does within a metaphysical system, yes. And that's what I'm asking.
I'm asking you to give a formal account of that.
Oh, you want me to give a formal account of that? Yeah, the formal account I could just give relative identity. If that's what you're asking for, but a logical notion of identity, then relative identity is going to be here. And sortal nouns, sortal is going to be a countable noun by which is used to count a specific thing in question, which the item falls under.
Okay, good. So now we're getting somewhere. So it is about sortals and how we count them. So now,
not necessarily.
Let's go back to. Yeah, it is. It is.
Because not everyone views identity in the same manner. So when you're speaking about identity, right?
Bro,
Like for example,
we're not talking about my theory of identity or my theory of counting or Danny's or anybody else. We're dealing with yours and only yours, and I'm checking to see what you believe and whether or not you actually have a consistent counting method across the board.
yeah, and
So
already
when you keep saying, oh well, yeah, but different people have different notions of identity, that's beside the point. It has nothing to do with what my line of questioning is getting at.
yeah, and under like a metaphysical notion is going to be that when it comes to like an entity being identical, right, it's going to be identical to the essence or being in which it is in reality in that respect. So if we're counting like one entity or one being, right, then we're counting that entity and being. But in respect to relative identity, your sorters are going to be used to count like items, basically.
Okay, good. So sortals are going to be used to count. So what is the formal application of that when it comes to God versus human beings? That's what I want an explanation of.
Well, the application between God and humans is going to be diverse, since when we look at like relative identity in itself, right, it admits to different identity relations. Thus, there's going to be different conditions for the identity to be met. So when we're speaking about like
exactly. So what are the conditions? What are the conditions?
It's going to be relative to
God
the sorter.
under the exactly. But
Yes.
what are the conditions in order to count as the same sort of God versus what are the conditions to count as the same sort of human?
Yeah, so when we count, I'm telling you, there isn't going to be the same conditions. Like what? Like that's not what relative identity is.
I didn't. Are you listening, bro?
Did
didn't
you not ask me
if they're going
what's
to
the
be the same
conditions?
conditions. I didn't ask if they're going to be the same conditions. I asked what the conditions are, which is open-ended.
Yeah, I can't hear you when you're moving
Specify
away.
whether or not they're.
Yeah, I
What?
can't hear you when you're like moving back and forth from the mic. So can you calm a bit closer so I can hear you?
I'm not moving back and forth from the mic. I have a Bluetooth on, which is connected to my ear, and there's no movement whatsoever.
Yeah, okay, so the condition, okay, so you're asking me what's the conditions for like for example, for two items to be the same human and then for two items to be the same God?
Yes.
Okay, so under like, let's say for example, God, we could say that the conditions for like these two items to be God would be that like both of these two items would have to share all of the predicates relative to the sort of God. We can see that the predicates here are going to be like omni properties, right? Which constitute.
Good. Thank you, sir. Now you're starting to get where we're going. Go ahead.
Yeah, right. And these omni properties is going to be essential since it constitutes some X to be God. Whereas when it comes to, for example, humans, right? Like when we say like two items are the same human, right? Under some like sort of concept, right? We can say like the predicates here are going to be like what rationality and animality. So if these two items satisfy, these conditions when they are humans under the specific category which is mentioned.
What makes them the same humans?
What makes them the same human?
You gave conditions for them being
yeah.
human. What are the conditions for them to be the same human?
The condition. What makes them human? What's the conditions for them to like? What do you mean by? Okay, so how?
Okay, let me
So
break
what do you
it
mean
down.
by same human?
This is, I don't think you were ready for this part of the conversation.
What do you mean
to be
by
very
same
honest with you? What do I mean by the same human?
Yeah, what do you mean by that?
That's exactly what I'm asking you. What do you mean by same human? What are the?
I already told you what I meant, so
such?
were you not listening?
No, you didn't.
Yes, I said they're going to be the same human.
Hold on a second.
Yeah, okay.
What you explained was you gave conditions for them being human in general. You did not give the conditions for them to count as the same human in the same way that you just did with God. So try again.
Oh my goodness. I said to you that those conditions in which we provide for an item to be human, right, are going to be the same conditions by which we identify by these two items are the same human. So when I'm saying, like, for example, Jake is the same human as G1, right, what does this mean? Right, it means that we have all of the predicates relative to this sort of concept by which constitute us to be human, by which we're identical under.
What are those predicates? That's the whole point.
I already
You gave, for
specified the
example,
predicates.
no, you did not.
Yes,
You
I did.
specified
Rationality
the
and analysis.
predicates. You specified, hold on a second. You specified the predicates for them to be the same God, and what it came down to after all this wasting of time is that they possess the same omni-properties, correct?
Of course, like them. No, I said for
Okay.
them to be count. I said for them to be counted the same. Look, okay, for them to be
For them to
counted the
be
same
counted
God.
as the same God, all of the omni-predicates and properties, they must possess all of them, correct?
Okay, now I'm seeing. Okay, now I'm seeing the confusion. When we're talking about the conditions for God and the conditions for human, right? Right. The reason why we can count multiple humans is because the psalter which is being used, imports discernibility. Whereas when we use the psalter God, it doesn't import discernibility, so we can't count multiple gods. Right.
So, again, I'm trying to simplify this. You're doing a lot of talking without actually answering my question. You very easily answered the question of what the conditions are in order to count as the same God, which was that all of the predicates or properties, the omni-predicates or properties, are possessed by all of the individuals, and that makes them count as the same God. Now, I'm asking you if we're evaluating whether or not two human beings really are one human being or count as such. What are the conditions? You need to give me a metaphysical explanation in the same way that you attempted to do with God when it comes to the omni-properties.
So a metaphysical.
What predicates
Okay, cool.
or properties?
So you're saying
Hold on a second. What predicates or properties must the two human beings in question possess in order to satisfy that they are the same human or count as the same human? Now, don't start going on about identity, this and this. Just give me a simple answer to that question.
Okay. So when we're talking about like an individual human and we're using relative identity, right? We're going to use, like, for example, we could use like accidents to be what's specified for the individual to be that individual. Or we can say person, right? We could say that Jake is the same person as Jake. And person here is going to denote the individual being human. And since person dominates human, and if you're the same person, then you're the same being.
So person dominates human when it comes to human beings.
No.
Hold on a second.
That's not what I'm saying, but okay, go ahead.
That's not what you just said? You didn't just say
I
that
said
person dominates human?
I said person dominates being. I said that person in this context, right, and when we're using the soul, right, is going to imply human being.
You said person dominates human being in this context.
I didn't hear you say human being. How do you say human? Bro, can you come closer? Like, you're laughing, but I can't hear you when you're going back and forth, bro.
Well, I don't know why you can't hear me.
We're all.
Other people having a problem?
Because your mic.
We hear you clearly.
Because
Hold on. G1, focus, please. I know you keep saying that you're not hearing him. We all just heard him laugh. We're hearing him.
Yeah, I can't. No one's saying I can't hear him. The point is what he's saying isn't clear. That's my point. So when he's speaking to me,
what do you mean? There's a problem with
let
the
me ask
mic?
Danny.
The point is you're not as clear.
G1, one second.
The point is I'm saying you're not
Hold on,
clear.
G1,
Like, I
one
can't
second.
hear
You made a point. You're saying he's not being clear. Danny, do you understand what Jake's saying?
I mean,
Wait,
I can hear,
it's not about
but sometimes he sounds a little bit away from the mic.
Exactly. Like what? Like, are you acting like I'm making this up? Like, what the heck? Like,
Nobody's acting like you're making it up. At least I'm not.
You said he wasn't.
I
Like,
asked.
Danny legit
I literally asked before. I said, "Can everybody hear me?"
Yeah, before it's not now.
Hold on a second. I'm talking on a Bluetooth. You're saying I'm moving away from the mic. It's impossible for me to do that. So
But
maybe
before-
there's a problem with the Bluetooth, but I am not moving away from my microphone.
Okay, cool. So then it must be a problem with the mic because Danny stated the same thing regarding to you.
So hold on a second. I'm gonna take off my Bluetooth. 1 second.
Oh, Jake, that might be the issue with your mod powers too. Might be interfering with that.
Okay, can you hear me now? Is this clearer?
Yeah, you're much clearer, bro.
Okay, I'll
So
test out your theory though. Speaking Muslim, 1 second. No, it's still the same on the mod thing. Anyway, so go ahead.
Yeah, can you reinstate what you're trying to ask me so we can reset the conversation?
Yeah. So I was trying to ask, what are the conditions for counting gods or to be the same God? You gave them. I'm satisfied with your explanation of what you just said. Now I'm trying to get down to how you do the same thing when it comes to human beings or being the same human being. I don't know how to make this any clearer.
Cool. Okay, cool. So when we're counting, I told you the conditions are going to be different, right? Because when we count there to be like one God, right, using relative identity, right, it's going to be relative to the total by which the individual, like, references predicates by which, like, imports some discernibility, right, in which we can't really count multiple gods in this respect. Whereas when it comes to humans, right, when we're saying like this human is this human relative to some sort of F, the sort of F which is going to be used imports discernibility, since there's going to be accidents such that, right, it can constitute or in fact be the evidence of the individual's individuation from the other individual.
Danny, do you think he answered my question, or is it just me?
I didn't really understand what he was saying.
With Danny, in fact, look, Danny,
because you're not answering the question, bro.
Yeah.
Because you're literally not answering.
Danny, what is he trying to say to me? Maybe you'll be more clear than him.
Well, I guess the background of the question is that just saying, oh, relative identity fixes the problem, right, is not enough. The point is that there are going to be conditions. We have criteria for, oh, okay, X and Y are the same human, the same God, the same cow, right? So if someone were to say Danny and G1 are the same human, right? So you count one human, right? Well, there are certain distinctions that seem to show that that's false, like you and I have different minds, for example, or whatever, right? So then we have criteria in mind by which, okay, G1 and Danny are not the same human, or they are, right? Now he's just asking, what are those kind of criteria by which you count Jesus and the Father as being the same God rather than different gods? Is that that's what you're asking, Jake, right?
Yeah, and I did provide the question.
Hold on a second. He gave that, or he tried to give that, and as I said, I'm satisfied insofar as moving the conversation forward. He gave the conditions for that when it comes to being the same God, but he did not give the conditions for that in terms of being the same human. He did not.
The conditions being the same.
Like an example, G1, if Jake were to ask me, I'd be like, oh, well, to be the same human, you'd have to have the same mind, same body, et cetera, right? Like that would be an example.
Yeah, I know. But the point is, I did say that when it comes to, like, for example, like G1 being the same person, right? So there's going to be a relation to myself, but it's going to be relative to the concept. I did say person.
But he's asking about human being.
Yeah, human being can correspond to, like, the person's intentional states. It can correspond to the person's personality.
Hold on a second.
I said it's going to be. You can use any condition. What do you mean? I don't have an answer. I'm giving you.
No. There you go. You're getting to the point. Hold on a second. You're getting to the point. You just said you can use any condition. Is that what you really want to say?
You can use any condition if it's sufficient for us to understand that these two items is such a thing. That's the point.
Exactly, and I'm asking you what those conditions are. And
I just told you the condition.
No. It's obvious that
any condition is sufficient.
It's obvious.
It doesn't mean I don't know. The point is relative identity.
Any condition is sufficient.
Like, if an individual was to say that when we say like G1, right, it's the same person as G1, and they take person here to denote like some intentional state or personality to be what constitutes that individual to be counted as one, then that's fine.
But I'm asking you for what that actually is.
What do you mean you're asking for what that actually is? So you're asking for the metaphysical explanation of what that actually is?
I'm asking for the content. I don't know how to
the metaphysical explanation, right?
I'm asking for the metaphysical explanation. Just as you can tell me, Jake, what makes the Father and Son, basically what this comes down to is the Father and Son are the same God because they possess the same omniproperties. That's basically what your whole explanation is reduced to. And I'm asking, what would make if we were questioning whether Jake and Danny are the same human, or Jake Brancatella and the Muslim metaphysician, which are two names that refer to what I believe is one human. So how would we analyze that? How would we determine whether or not Jake and the Muslim metaphysician count as one human versus Danny and Jake counting as one human? What are the conditions by which we can evaluate those two questions?
Okay, so you're asking me for a metaphysical explanation. So that's what it means when you say content. Okay, cool. So when we're speaking about, for example,
I'm asking for presumably properties in the same way that you gave omni properties for God.
an explanation,
How
right?
else
No,
could it
okay,
be any
okay, I'm
simpler?
confused. Let's wait. So Jake, do you believe that there's a formal problem when it comes to the Trinity when we use RI? Like, do you think it still consists?
Bro, we're still spinning around in circles here.
Yeah,
I've been asking the same question. I've been asking you the same question for the past 20 minutes.
Yeah, but the point is, look, Jake, the point is, do you think that when it comes to relative
I'll tell you
identity,
exactly what the point is. The point is you don't have an answer because you know what's going to happen at the next step. If you actually give an answer to that, I'm going to show how this entire theory falls apart. That's exactly what's happening.
No, it's because you're being, look, the point is you're being obscure, right? Because I don't know what you
I'm
mean.
not being obscure.
I'm going to explain why. I'm going to explain why, right? Because even Danny would agree with me as well, right? Because when it comes to the LPT, when you read Bro Branson, like you always state, like within your other videos, that the LPT is going to be understood as a formal problem and an implicit problem. And the implicit problem, right, is going to correspond to the metaphysical commitments which the individual provides. So like the semantics or whatever. But then when it comes to the formal problem, right, with relative identity, there isn't one.
But what does this have to do with answering Jake's question?
It's because in one
refusing
sense,
to answer it.
it's because Danny,
It's
because I'm
basically
trying to
come down to
understand.
you cannot tell me.
Because we Danny, we hold on.
You are incapable of telling me
Yo,
what the
let me
conditions are.
land. No. It's because every time I try to give, look, the point is, right, is because when it comes to this discussion I've had with Danny, and he would say, okay, cool, the problem is going to rely on what it is meant.
Bro, you're
right?
diverting
Meaning,
from the topic.
Yeah.
I'm asking you a
Jake,
simple question,
one second.
and you're telling me what Danny ate for lunch.
so Jake, okay, so I'm asking you, so you know what's up?
Was with Danny.
Hold on, G1, 1 second, with all due respect, because we've just hit. It's 11:03. I want you guys to try to wrap this up, and we can move on to another person.
I'll give him here. How about this?
I gave him the conditions,
We'll
but then
give
just
him-
ask him
hold
to
on a
explain
second.
how the condition is met.
Hold on, bro. We're gonna let you talk. We'll let you talk and say whatever you have to say for the final couple minutes, and then we're gonna drop you and move on to somebody else. Go ahead.
Oh my goodness. Right. I already gave you the conditions in the way in which we can count one human or multiple humans, right? And in respect to God, right, in the way in which I'm using the sort of God, right, is going to import discernibility in which we can't count multiple gods, right? But then when you're asking me, okay, cool, right, when it comes to like counting one human, what is going to be the condition, right? It's either you're saying that, okay, cool, when we're saying that there's one human under this notion of relative identity, what are we trying to say? Are we saying that G1 is the same person as G1? And person here is going to indicate personality by which we can count one individual, in this case, by which we can say that, let's say, for example, G1 is the same person as G1, but not Danny, right? So we can understand with these statements that G1 and Danny are not going to be the same person because G1 is the person in question.
Jake, if you don't mind, I think I see perhaps what might be the confusion. There's a difference between whether it's coherent to say Danny is the same person or human as G1, right? Because that statement alone is not incoherent, right? But what the problem with it is that the truth conditions for that statement are not obtained, right? Because we have certain conditions that need to be in place in order to make that statement true. And that's essentially, right, it's not whether it's coherent to say by itself with no context that, you know, Jesus is the same God as the Father, right? It's what are the truth conditions such that that obtains, right? And that's what we haven't gotten an answer to.
Yeah, but the truth
has not
conditions.
answered the question.
But I already
answered the question.
But I already told you. But the truth conditions is going to be valid.
I'm sorry, but when we say that A is the same human as B, that's what we haven't gotten an answer to.
So A is the same human as B, and what answer have you not? Like, what's the condition for
What
A
are,
and B?
what
to
are
be
the
same human?
truth
Well, you
conditions?
haven't
But
given it, bro. We're
Bro,
asking
can I
you
speak
for
to
what the
Danny,
truth
bro? Because you're not
conditions
really
are.
clear.
No, I am very clear. I've been
B,
clear
wait,
the
hold on,
entire
Danny.
time.
So Danny, so when you're saying A is the same human as B, what was you asking pertaining to that statement?
so you
What
gave
are the
truth
conditions
conditions.
for them to count
No,
as the same human?
to count as the same. Okay, okay. You using same human within the statement of same human doesn't mean that it's going to be used in the same sense. Like when I'm saying same human,
All right,
right?
speaking. Let's
The
move on,
same
bro.
as he is going
Let's
to
move
be
on.
relative
All
to the
right, G1,
concept.
G1, thank you, sir. Only
Oh
because
my goodness, bro.
hold on. With all due respect, we did say you could land your final point. Jake would make a response. We're kind of going back and playing tennis again. So
Like I'm
let's try, let's just try again next week because we
but
pretty
he's
much
being
used up the majority of the time.
but you understand that, host, but he's being
Bro,
very
can
like
we drop the
he's
guy, man?
being
Honestly,
he's
Yeah,
being being
this is getting
G1, I'm
bro,
gonna move on. Okay, thank you for
bro.
joining,
so
brother.
hold
Sorry
on.
about that.
Let me just give a recap of what just happened. Okay, this guy is trying to explain how, let's say, the Father and Son are the same God. They're the same God because they count as the same God insofar as they have the same omni-properties. Now, they're not the same person for other reasons because they have distinct, whether it be properties or predicates that distinguish the persons from each other, right? But in terms of them counting as the same God, they count as the same God because they have the same omni properties. Now, I was asking a very simple question, which he could not answer. In fact, he gave 2 or 3 different answers if you track appropriate throughout the conversation, which at one point, and somebody is mentioning in the comments, that he said rationality and animality. Okay, well, that would give us some content in terms of trying to analyze this question and what are the truth conditions for being the same human, but that obviously isn't enough because under G1's conception, both he and I, and Danny, as well as everybody else, hopefully on this platform, have rationality or possess rationality and animality. So that's going to help us into understanding what it means to be human in a general sense, but that's going to do absolutely nothing into helping us understand what the truth conditions are for understanding whether Danny and I are the same human or whether Jake Brancatella and the Muslim metaphysician are the same human. He never gave us those details to distinguish from general humanity towards explaining what actually are the truth conditions for counting as the same human. And the reason why he can't do that in a consistent way, and none of these other guys who are parading or attempting to parade this relative identity solution is because it's completely ad hoc. There is no consistent way by which you can show universally what the different conditions are for all of these different sortals. And what I was going to show is that now when we posit it and go back to God, it's the same exact thing. Okay, well, they have the same omni properties, but there are major distinctions between the persons. For example, the Father's unbegotten, the Son is begotten by the Father. And even causal language is used amongst the church fathers for that. So why can't I think that because there's a dependency relation and causal distinction between the Father and Son, that that's sufficient to establish that they can't be the same God? In other words, it all comes down to his own arbitrary definition. He's just arbitrarily stating it as a fact that these are the conditions for what makes the same God. I can disagree with that. And when he now comes to talking about the same human, he's not able to give that because he has no consistent approach to this way of distinguishing different beings in these different sortals. He has no way of doing that. I do because I count by identity, and by identity I mean classical absolute identity, which fulfills Leibniz's law. And so I can tell, whether you agree with me or not, I can tell a consistent story about what makes Jake a different human being than Danny and what makes Jake the same human being as the Muslim metaphysician as I could for their story about God or dogs or anything else. But G1 doesn't have a consistent theory for that. It's all completely arbitrary, and that's why he was not able to even provide the truth conditions for what count as the same human. And he said, I wasn't being clear. I was being clear as day, but he wasn't tracking because he wasn't ready for this objection to what he had to say. And that's why I had to ask the same question 5 different ways for the past 30 minutes or more. So anyway, we can move on to the next person. If anybody else on the stage has any final thoughts on that, they can comment, but I'd like to talk to somebody else eventually.
Yeah, I want to make a comment. So I totally agree. How I would say it is that it's just a philosophical commitment, right? That's not a logical justification. And I'd also add that I think this has been known for a very long time. This is why many, especially the Cappadocian church fathers, would appeal to mystery. This is exactly why, because it's really not based on something consistent. You have to have a commitment philosophically to just deny it. And obviously that's why, because it goes to 3 gods.
You believe what?
I believe that we spoke past each other because it seemed when it came to the questions that you're asking me, you was asking me in relation to like a formal account of identity, of how it's going to be applied. But then when he was asking me certain questions, or when the dialogue progressed further, it seemed that he was asking me to give metaphysical explanations of why we would say that all of the 3 persons are the same God, right?
No, you already gave an explanation for that.
I gave an explanation. Look, the point is, right, when it comes to I, do you believe that there's going to be a formal issue or like a metaphysical
first of all,
issue?
when you say RI, there is no one thing that is RI. So depends on what actual theory you hold to. If you hold to Peter
Well,
Geach's,
it's going to be like impure.
Hold on a second.
Hey, G1, let him finish. Go ahead.
Yeah, if you hold to Peter Geach's understanding, if you hold to Griffin's understanding, there are multiple different understandings of RI. So I think from what you said last time, you hold to Griffin's understanding, correct?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Okay, so that means that, just to clarify, you believe that absolute, or what I would call absolute or classical identity, you think, and Leibniz's law, you think that those are coherent ways of speaking about identity, but you think that sortals are more fundamental.
I wouldn't say like, what do you mean by more fundamental?
That we can't actually make a proper distinction without first appealing to sortals.
We couldn't make a proper distinction for, no, I wouldn't say such, because Nicholas Griffin would make a distinction between like identity statements, since he affirms and I affirm that some identity statements can be absolute and then others are going to be relative. But when it comes to like an identity statement being relative, you can't reduce it to like an absolute identity statement. So I could say in respect to a relative identity statement, then sure, yeah.
Okay, let me ask you this. This is where we got to last time. We didn't get hung up on how do you count gods, because that was clear. You gave a metaphysical account of that. Do you remember what it was?
Yeah, the reason why we're gonna count one God is that there's going to be like existence, right? In essence, is going such for any entity which is identified with the essence, right, is going to be identified with the existence, meaning that it's not going to be possible to count multiple entities which are God, right? Because if that is the case, it would imply that the essence or the deity is going to be really distinct for the entity.
Yeah, but you more specifically, you cast it out in terms of
pure actuality.
No, the 3 persons all possessing the same omni properties.
Yeah, of course, right? But then that was more in relation to relative identity, because even prior to like,
I'm asking what are the conditions for being a god? And you eventually came down to sharing or possessing all of the omni properties.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So, are those all essential? Are those all essential properties?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So, for God, or to be considered God, it's sufficient to possess all of the essential properties alone. There's nothing else required.
Yeah, there's
Okay.
nothing else which is required. It's going to be serve all the omni properties.
Okay. Now, for human beings, are possessing essential properties for being human, is that sufficient for being the same human?
To be in the same human, I think it's different. When
Okay.
you're saying being the same human, what do you mean here?
I don't think we can get any more simple than that.
No,
What
it's
does it
because
mean?
earlier when you're asking me the conditions to be right, right, is going to have all of the omni properties. I said, yeah, that is the case. But then if you're asking me,
But that's how
what's then
you.
getting at being the same in a relative aspect?
No, hold on a
So you're
second. Let's go back to the case of God, because make sure we are before we proceed. When I ask you what are the conditions for being the same God, say it a number of different ways, but the simplest way for this conversation and this audience is that all of the three persons are, because they possess all of the essential omni properties.
yeah, of course, yeah.
Okay. So now, in the same way that you didn't ask me further, what does it mean to be the same God? Because that's what I asked you, and you provided that answer. Now I'm getting to the case, what does it mean to be the same human? And I'm asking, is possessing the essential properties for being human in general, is that sufficient to establish that Jake and G1 are the same human, or whatever the X and Y are under consideration in terms of the human beings? What is it that is required to establish that they are the same human?
Same human as in human being or the nature
Same
which the
human
individual
being,
possesses?
same human being, in the same way that you explained what same God meant.
Yeah, so the conditions for being the same human is going to be the essential predicates, right?
So essential properties of being human is sufficient for establishing that they're the same human.
Establishing whether the same human, yeah. But when it
Do
comes
you
to
go ahead?
yeah, so yeah, it's going to be sufficient, right? When we're saying that Jake is the same human as G1, human here is going to elicit, right, liquidity, right? So what constitutes some X to be human? And we're saying that's going to be sufficient insofar as it's going to depict rationality and animality. And since both of us satisfy these predicates, we're going to be the same human, relatively speaking, not absolutely speaking. But the reason why we wouldn't be counted as the same human is going to be that we have accidental properties, right, which discern me and you. Hence, we cannot be considered to be the same individual human being.
And what are those accidental properties?
The accidental properties could be, for example, like the color, like for example, you're white and black. It could be spatial location. It could be quantity.
Okay, so when it comes to God possessing the same essential properties is sufficient for establishing the same God. But when it comes to human beings, essential properties are insufficient to establishing that two humans are the same human.
Yeah, I feel like we're kind of equivocating how sameness is understood here.
No,
So
we're
when
not.
I'm
We're not at
saying,
all.
no, I think there's just like a confusion. When we're saying that, oh, there's going to be sufficient condition for X and Y to be the same God, where God is being used as a sole tool, we're just stating that, like, in this interpretation, we're only going to count one God, because all
Yeah.
of the sole tools relative to the sole tool, God, is going to import indiscernibility, meaning that there isn't going to be an interpretation by which I gave you such that we can count different gods. Whereas when it comes to us, the sort of human does import discernibility. So even if I say that, G1 and Jake are the same human, right? This could even mean that these two names refer to the same entity, which is a human being, or it could mean that it's referring to two individual human beings, right? But for us to establish like there's going to be a real difference in human beings, right? We may just need another sort to specify, like person, right? And person here can denote like what's called intentional states.
No, I'm talking about the same.
Yeah, it's okay. Same human being, relatively speaking, right? I already told you what's the conditions for that to be the case, but they satisfy the predicates relative to what a soul human imports to be.
Okay, so
speaking about me and you not being different.
Are the persons of the Trinity the same God in the same way that you and I are the same human being?
No.
Okay, what's the difference?
Because when it comes to relative identity, there's different conditions related to the sort of which is being employed.
Right.
That's
the
the key
only
principle.
difference. The only difference is the relevant properties. But I'm saying
No. It's not even just. Yeah, of course, it's going to be the relevant properties, right? But then when we look at, for example, relative identity relations, yeah, there's going to be different conditions for it.
But but that's what we're trying to get down to, G1.
Yeah, and I gave you the conditions.
No, you haven't.
Yeah,
You've established, as far as I just heard you say, that Jake and G1 are the same human in the sense that we both have rationality or animality, or it can be said that we're of the same sort of human in the sense that we have the same essential properties.
Yeah, of course.
How is that? So how is that different than the case of God? It's not different. The only difference is what are the essential properties under consideration. God has different essential properties than human beings, but in terms of the general aspect of having or possessing the same essential properties, then it is the same principle.
No. The reason why it isn't going to be the same principle is that we can understand, yes, of course, there's going to be two sets of essential properties which pertain to one soul and not the other, which is being recognized. But then the reason why I'm saying it isn't going to be the same is that when it comes to the soul of God, it imports what's it called, indiscernibility. Whereas the soul of human does import discernibility, because when it comes to the soul of human, right, there's going to be that there's a certain respect such that some X and some Y can be human, right? But they can have a property which X has and Y does not have and still be qualified to be human. Whereas when it comes to God, that isn't going to be the case. Because I'm saying that, okay, cool.
That's just an assertion.
It's an assertion which
It's a stipulation.
Go ahead.
It's a stipulation which the theory requires, but there's no argument given for it. My argument is that either essential properties alone are sufficient for distinguishing between humans and God, or they're not, right? So for humans, you admit that individuation requires more than essential properties. You cannot prove or substantiate that there's more than one human being without appealing to something other than essential properties for human beings. Do you agree with that?
We're not just saying that essential properties is going to be what like individuates or constitutes individuation, since mass terms could be understood to be like essential properties in that respect.
I didn't say
but I'm saying to you, yeah, but the point is, when we're using soul tools, right? Soul tools specify the thing which is counting. So soul tools actually have the principle for individuation. Since if we're saying that two items or many items fall under the soul tool, we're saying that it's possible for it to be counted, right, by the reason of the soul tool.
Yeah, but bro, you're just simply stipulating this into the theory.
The stipulation is, of course, because we're speaking about.
G1, hold on. Listen.
I'm driving deeper into the theory. I'm saying to you, your inconsistency is that for God, essential properties alone are sufficient for identity under the sort of God. However, under the sort of human, essential properties are insufficient.
No, I didn't say essential properties isn't sufficient for identity, right?
Okay,
and again, identity. Wait, hold on.
Hold on, he's going to
Like
ask you a question. G1,
identity.
hold on. G1, let Jake ask you a question.
It's
'cause
fine. Let him go. Let him go. Go ahead.
Yeah,
you're-
I was
okay.
gonna say like identity. Look, for example, right? Identity counting does presuppose identity, but just because there's going to be identification doesn't mean that counting is going to be used. Like, because remember, when we look at, for example, identity in relation to mass terms, we believe that mass terms import identification such that we can say that some yellow thing is the same yellow thing as that yellow thing over there. And that's going to be an identity statement. But the identity statement here, right, isn't going to be using a sortable or a mass term. So that isn't going to be the case, one. And two, I already said to you that essential predicates are going to be essential to identify the thing by which falls under it. So when we're speaking
Are
about
they
the source of human,
sufficient? Are they both?
I did say yes. I said both of them are sufficient for identify the thing which is falls under the specific category.
Okay, so then in that case, what I'm going to say follows, and when you respond and say it doesn't follow, then you're wrong, you're inconsistent. If essential properties alone are sufficient to establishing same God and same human, then that means Jake and G1 are the same human under the sortal human in a similar way or same way that Father and Son are the same God under the sortal God.
It's not going to be in the same way, but it's going to
It
be in a
is because
similar
it's
way.
by fulfilling
It's
the
going to be.
essential. It's
It's
by
going to be.
fulfilling the essential properties under consideration under the sortal God and under the sortal human.
It's not going to be this. Look, it's not going to be the same way because the conditions are not going to be the same. Such that when we're
Conditions are
talking
the
about,
same. The conditions
yeah,
are
because
possessing
remember
the
when it
same
comes to
essential
relative
properties.
identities, yeah, because what you need to understand is relative identity statements, right, can be understood as in reference to qualitative identity statements, such that if an absolute identity theorist such as yourself, right, was to like view the statement, Jake is the same human as G1, you can view that as a qualitative identity statement, such that we're saying that there's a common property by which Jake and G1 has, by which we're saying that they're going to be identical relative to the category which is being specified, right? But this doesn't pick out a numerical sameness if that's what you're trying to ask. And the reason why it isn't going to be numerical sameness is that when I use the sort of person, right, it's going to denote that me and you are not going to be the same individual human being, right? Such that we can't be counted as the same individual human being. Whereas when it comes to God, right, the sort of God imports there, such that there isn't going to be a consideration, such that you can count
This is
multiple
just an
gods under the
assertion.
sort of.
It's just a stipulation of the theory. You're not giving any metaphysical principle behind that claim.
Okay, so you want me to ask? So you want me to give you a metaphysical explanation of why that isn't going to be the case, right? Okay, beautiful. So the reason why me and you wouldn't be counted as the same individual entity, right, is such that our matter is going to be the principle for our individuation, right? Since I take like an Aristotelian / Aquinas view on principle of individuation. So the reason why me and you are going to be different is that our matter individuates us. Whereas when it comes to God, the principle individuation isn't going to be the same, right? Because matter isn't going to be used here and form isn't going to be used here because we don't believe that God is a form, right? Because a form has some correspondence to a relation to like an entity which is composed of act and potency, in which we reject of God.
I asked
right?
you
So
that
we're seeing
before.
what individuation is going to be in respect to the relations.
Everything you just said gets boiled down to one simple statement, which you've gone back and forth on, and you've contradicted yourself several times now.
Where's the
Because
contradiction?
I'm going to show you. Because before you said essential property, having or possessing the essential properties for being considered under the sort of human were sufficient to establishing that they're the same human. However, now you are saying you can individuate between human beings by appealing to something other than essential properties.
No, I'm not appealing to something other than essential properties.
You are appealing to things that individuate human beings that are not essential properties.
What do you mean if it's not essential? Look, again, right, you asked me regarding to how our I is employed in respect to a human, right, in respect to God, and how we understand identity relations. I already told you that it's going to be the predicates which constitute the identity between some item, such which is human. And I'm
Are they
saying that it is
essential
the
properties?
case. But then
Are
when
they
you're asking me
essential
how is it going to be the case, metaphysically speaking, that's a different question here.
Are they essential properties?
Essential properties. What essential properties?
Under the consideration of human being, we're talking about human beings.
Yeah, of course. But we're not saying essential properties were individuals still.
Does individuation require more than essential properties?
Does individuation require more on essential properties? In respect to a human, yes.
Okay. With respect to God, is more than essential properties required for individuation?
No.
Exactly. So
What do you mean exactly?
That's the point. That's what the contradiction is.
So-
You have two categories. You have
Uh-huh.
You have one human that individuates in a specific way, right?
Okay.
Which needs to appeal to essential, other than essential properties. And then for God, right? You don't have to. You don't have to appeal to other than essential properties to individuate them.
Yeah, because the conditions are going to be different.
If you are you an anti-realist?
I'm not an anti-realist, no.
You're not. Okay. So then if you're a realist, you need to actually give a real metaphysical principle to establish what the difference is between those two cases, which you haven't been able to do. And the second thing is, hold on. And the second thing is when it comes to within God or within the Trinity itself, when it comes to being within the Trinity itself, what about the category of persons? What is sufficient in order to distinguish the persons from one another?
It's going to be the hypostatic properties, which will fall under the subtle person by which we distinguish them. But then again, right, you're saying that your point is that when it comes to the principle of individuation between God and human, it's going to be different. But that's legit the whole point of subtle relative identity. That when it comes to the principle of individuation, it's going to be relative, right, to the subtle which is being employed. So how are you saying that's going to be a contradiction?
I know
but that's
that.
going to be part of the thesis. So,
Yeah, that's
so
the
if you knew that, then how are you saying that's going to be problematic?
It's simply a stipulation of the theory. There is no argument or principle that explains why that is not ad hoc. It's just a pure stipulation of the theory. I don't know how you.
How does it? What do you mean?
It's only, in other words,
explanation.
in other words,
Hold on.
in other words, you're saying that more than essential properties is required to individuate humans when it comes to humans, but it's not required when it comes to God. And that seems as a mere ad hoc stipulation to protect, or an attempt to protect, the Trinity from tritheism. That's one thing. Second thing, because of the fact that you don't hold Geach's theory, and you don't hold other versions of relative identity, which completely deny what I call absolute or classical identity, then that means, in a certain sense and in a certain manner of counting by absolute or classical identity, then you would have to admit that the Trinity would be three gods.
No, the reason why that isn't going to be the case, look, you keep conflating between counting and identity, right? Just because we identify something between two things doesn't mean that it's always going to be counted.
Sorry, G1, you said he was conflating two things.
Yeah, and I'm saying the conflation, because
so
look,
can you state clearly what two things he's conflating?
yeah, he's saying, okay, cool. When we're talking about some sameness relation, which is relative between two things, let's say X and Y, right? We're saying the sameness relation, right, is going to hold if and only if, right, X and Y satisfy all of the predicates relative to a general noun or term.
Is the same true for humans?
Is that
principle true for human and God?
Hold on.
Well, answer the question, because
Answer the question. Is that same principle true for human and God?
They see, of course, the same principle.
Okay, then G1 and Jake are both the same human in the same way that Father and Son are the same God.
No, that doesn't follow.
Yes, it does.
The principle
we fulfill the same human under the same
because the principle
as Father and Son
that doesn't follow. That doesn't follow.
All right, hold on, G1.
Yes,
G1, stop, please. All right, listen. He's making I'm just being honest. He's making a very clear point. And I'm not trying to be rude to you because you're very polite. but I do feel like you're coping and you're struggling here. Do you want to
It's not
call this,
cope.
or can we just go? Look, I'm gonna let you go one more time. Let Jake respond, and then let's just move on to the next guest.
but look,
Yeah, I just want to
the
ask one
reason.
more question before he leaves, but he can
Yeah,
say what
but
he wants.
you guys keep interrupting me. You asked me like earlier to explain
No, I'm
something,
letting
and
you
then you
talk. Go
interrupted
ahead.
me to ask me a quick. Look, I'm saying the reason why there isn't going to be this, just because we're saying that for any X and Y to be the same, relatively speaking, right, they have to be relative to the category which is being employed, right? But then again, just because we're saying that this falls under what we're speaking about, human and God, doesn't mean that the conditions are going to be the same. Because the key point here of our reference is going to be relative to the category. And we can understand that the sort of God and sort of human are two different categories. So we can't say the conditions are going to be the same. Because that isn't what sort of
I
relative
guess you don't
identity
know. I guess you don't know
imports.
what I mean by conditions being the same. What I
So
mean
what do you
by
mean conditions being the
conditions,
same?
you just stated the principle, and you said the same principle is true for both God and human. That's what I mean for the conditions being the same. That doesn't mean that, oh, that means because those conditions in detail when it comes to God are essential omni properties, that when it
No,
comes to
that's not what I'm saying.
human,
That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm
let
saying.
me finish. Let me finish. You're interrupting me.
Yeah, go
That
right
doesn't mean that when it comes to human, that we're going to be talking about essential omni properties. Obviously not.
No, that's
But
not what
it
I'm saying.
means that whatever the essential properties are required under the given sortal in context, so long as the two beings in question satisfy those essential properties, then they count as the same human or the same God.
Yeah, that isn't what that's not what I was saying. Look,
That's
let me make
exactly
it. No,
what you said.
that isn't what I was saying. Look, I'll give you an example, right?
The G1, this
Okay,
will
I'll
be
give
your
you.
last round, and I got to go to the next guest. Okay.
Sure. Yeah, the reason why that isn't. Look, for example, when we speak about absolute identity, right? Absolute identity, right, has a strong equivalence relation, right? But this equivalence relation, which satisfies Leibniz's rule, is going to be universal, such that if we say like X and Y is identical, it's just going to be the case if and only if, for whatever is true of X is true of Y. But this doesn't mean that when we speak about, like, for example, G1 is G1, right, the predicates here is going to be different than what we're saying if we say raise is raise, right? But that doesn't mean that the predicates, I don't know, you're laughing. The
Yeah,
whole
you're
point
just going
is,
over your head like a goofy
what do you
man.
mean go on? No, because you don't understand what I'm saying. Look, the principle is going to be different because identity relations are going to be different on the relative identity relative to the sort of which is being employed. But when it comes to absolute identity, it's going to be one and the same thing. When we're talking about
Exactly.
quantification, it's going to be unrestricted, whereas in relative identity, it's going to be restricted within the given category or domain that we're speaking about. So if
Okay,
I'm
so
saying, so look, because you're getting conflated between
I'm
your
not.
position and my position. Yeah, because if you'd understand that just because there's going to be a sameness relation doesn't mean the conditions are going to be the same if you look at two categories, such as human and God,
I never
right?
said that. I said the conditions are the same in the sense that both are requiring essential properties to be fulfilled.
Relative to what?
To the sortal in question, one
Okay,
is
meaning that,
God and one
okay,
is human,
beautiful.
Okay. Hold
And you
on.
sortals
G1.
have, and
which
you
I
sortals,
already said. I
and
already
okay,
said
wait,
that.
hold on.
Hold
And
on.
you
G1.
sortals under my paradigm.
G1. Wait for a minute, because I've given you already an extra round after the final round.
Yeah,
Right?
but I feel like we're not really getting into the meat. Like, we just,
Well,
because he doesn't understand my
hold on.
position.
No, he
I
does,
do. I
and
do.
he
You don't
totally
understand the
No, you
understands.
objection.
don't.
One second. We don't want to waste too much time here. The reality is, I brought you back up because firstly, you're the only Trinitarian who was requesting. So I want to point that out, that Chris Claus and Avery and the rest of
Yeah, they're all cowards.
the dog logic ministry doesn't want to step up. So G1, I appreciate you stepping up. But at the same time, I feel like you're repeating yourself because he's kind of breaking it down for you 3 or 4 times. So if you want, we can go back and listen to the recording after this, and then we can try again next week. All right? I
Yeah,
promise
but
you
I'm
that.
saying
I
we're
just hold on,
speaking Muslim.
because the only
I'm
thing,
saying I understand
hold
what
on,
he's
hold on.
trying to say, but he's misunderstanding
Okay, but
an
here's the
element
thing.
within the thesis of our eye.
Here's the thing.
No, I'm not.
The call's recorded.
Sure.
Hold on. The call's recorded. They get posted. You can go back. You can review it. You can come back next week. I just
Bro,
want to utilize the whole live just to hash out a conversation that started previously, right? So let's give other folks a chance. We'll put a pin in it right here. I know Ray's wanted to say something. I made him wait till the end.
He's a Muslim. Like
No, I know, but I've not let him chime in. Jake still didn't get to say his last word, and we're just kind of running out of time. So
is there any other Christian trying to rise up? Like I don't think so.
There is. There's a guy named well, I'm not going to say his name, but it's Jadani is like his English name.
I feel like maybe it's either next time you extend the time or we do on Discord, because every time we just don't even get to the meat of it. Because I'm saying that he's actually misunderstanding.
I'll ask Jake. Jake, do you want to continue this conversation?
Because
No. I mean, my last question was going to be, since he admits that there is such a thing as classical absolute identity and that it is coherent, are we able to count by it in any sense?
Yeah, if and only if the identity statement is absolute.
Yeah, so I'm saying if and only if the identity statement is absolute, is it appropriate in the context of human beings to count by that?
Appropriate if and only if the identity relation is absolute. I give you a conditional.
Yeah,
I give you a
and I
biconditional.
asked, is that ever appropriate to count by that?
I said yes. I gave you an answer, and I gave you the biconditional.
Yes, the answer is yes.
Yes,
Can you
which
count
I
by
did.
that? Can you count by that same principle when it comes to God in any sense?
No, because the reason why is because when it comes to the identity statement here, it's going to be relative. So we're not going to employ absolute identity. And again, if you actually read Nicholas Griffin, you'd understand for some statements.
What disallows us to use absolute identity?
Because absolute identity would mean that when we're talking about the statement of which we judge to be a statement of identification, right, it has to be absolute, right? Just because there's some identification or identity is being employed, doesn't always mean that absolute identity is being posited here. Like, for example, identity of time.
What's the problem with it?
What's the problem with Leibniz's law?
No, what's the problem? Why can I count human beings by Leibniz's law, but I can't? It's haram or impermissible for me to count gods by Leibniz's law. Why?
I'm saying you can count. I said you can count that, but you're asking me about my position. I give you my position.
No. I didn't ask about your position. We asked about your position the whole time.
You did. You're asking me when it comes to the statements.
I'm asking you, G1, I'm asking you now, what makes it impermissible for me, Jake Brancatella, to count gods by Leibniz's law?
Well, I'm saying you can. I'm not saying you cannot. You asked me about what I believe.
So in a certain sense, So in a certain sense, there is one sense in which there are three gods in the Trinity, and that's if you count gods by Leibniz's law, correct?
And that's if the statement is going to be an absolute identity statement, which is
that's how I'm judging it. I'm saying
I'm
judging it by that standard, by an absolute identity statement, and counting by Leibniz's law that there would be three gods in the Trinity under those conditions, correct?
Under those conditions, yeah. I don't disagree with that. That's only if the statement is going to be absolute.
And what is your argument for it being impermissible for me to do that? What's the argument?
Impermissible for doing that? What do you mean? There's no argument for that.
There is no argument for that.
Okay, there's no argument for that, but that doesn't mean.
Hold on, G1.
There is no argument for that. Thank you very much. Let's move on. Hold on. Let's move on to the next person speaking, please.
Yeah, but you legit.
Let's move on to the next person.
G1, 1 second, brother. I want you to go back when I post this. Listen to it.
What's going on?
G1, relax. I was just on your live the other day. I got thoroughly disrespected by your guest, so I'm actually showing you way more respect than I got shown. So please, do me a favor. 1 second. I'm gonna tell you goodbye.